In 1964, the average American family earned about $6,000 a year. One income, one car, usually used, a house with a mortgage they actually paid off, and at the end of every single month, they still had money left over. No budgeting app told them how to do it. No algorithm tracked their spending. No high-yield savings account promised them 4.9% if they just linked their direct deposit and waited. They had something else, something quieter, something we stopped teaching our children decades ago and have been paying for ever since. How did ordinary people, working people, build real security with less than half of what we earn today? That question kept me up at night. And when I finally found the answer, it wasn't in a bank, it wasn't in a brokerage, it was in an old kitchen, on a windowsill, inside 3 glass jars with handwritten labels. Stay with me, because tonight we're opening the forgotten savings playbook of the 1960s, and what's inside it will change the way you look at every dollar you spend for the rest of your life. America before the credit card. Before we go any further, close your eyes for just a moment and try to feel it, not see it, feel it. The weight of a coin in your hand, the texture of a paper grocery bag, the sound of a screen door closing behind you on a Tuesday evening in August. That world, the world of 1964 America, operated on a completely different financial rhythm than anything we know today. There were no credit card minimum payments, no one-click purchases, no subscription renewals that slide out of your account so quietly you forget they were ever there. Money was something you could hold, something you could count, something that told you, without any app or algorithm, exactly where you stood. Inflation that year was just 1.3%. To put that in context, if you saved $100 in January of 1964, it was worth nearly $100 in December of 1964. The dollar held its shape, and families, working with that stability, built habits so reliable, so deeply wired into their daily lives, that those habits became something close to a religion, a quiet, domestic, entirely unglamorous religion of saving. Let me introduce you to a family. We'll call them the Hargroves, though you'll recognize them, because they lived in some version on every block in America. Robert Hargrove worked at a manufacturing company outside of Columbus, Ohio. He drove a 4-year-old Ford paid for in cash. His wife, Margaret, managed the household. And that word, managed, is the right one. She didn't just run the house, she ran the finances of the house with the discipline and precision of a woman who understood, deeply and without anyone ever telling her, that every dollar had a destination before it arrived. Their home was modest, 1,400 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with yellow curtains and a linoleum floor that Margaret mopped every Thursday. On the windowsill above the sink sat 3 glass jars, each one labeled in Margaret's careful handwriting. One said groceries, one said emergencies, one said next month. There was no 4th jar. There was no jar for want. There was no jar for impulse. And that, right there, that quiet discipline sitting on a windowsill in 1964 Columbus is where our story truly begins. When money had a face you recognized. The jar system wasn't invented by Margaret Hargrove. Women across America were using it, had been using it for generations. It was passed from mother to daughter the way recipes were passed, not written down, not formally taught, just absorbed through proximity and observation. You watched your mother count money into jars. One day, without thinking, you did it too. The genius of the system wasn't the jars themselves, it was what the jars forced you to confront every single time you opened one. When you reached into the grocery jar and felt it getting thin, you felt it. Your fingers told you what no banking app can replicate. There is less here than there was. And that physical signal, that tactile moment of recognition, changed behavior in a way that a number on a screen simply does not. Behavioral researchers would eventually spend decades trying to understand why people spend more freely with cards than with cash. The answer was always the same: friction, pain, the small momentary discomfort of handing over something real. Those jars on Margaret Hargrove's windowsill were full of friction, and friction, it turns out, is one of the most powerful saving tools ever invented. There was another ritual in the Hargrove kitchen that most people today would barely notice if they stumbled across it. Sitting on the counter near the telephone, because every kitchen had a telephone near the counter, was a small tin box. A shortbread cookie tin, actually, the kind that came around at Christmas and never quite left. Inside that tin lived the change, not coins set aside as savings, not coins waiting for a purpose, just the change from the weekly grocery run. Every Tuesday, after Margaret came home from the A&P with her paper bags lined up on the back seat of the car, she emptied her change purse into that tin. She never counted it, she never thought about it particularly, but at the end of every 3 months, when Robert sat down with the household ledger, he counted it. And without fail, without planning, without intention, that little tin held somewhere between $12 and $22, roughly between $100 and $180 in today's money. Saved without trying, saved without an app reminding her. Saved because the habit of separation was wired into the daily routine so deeply it required no willpower whatsoever.
Writing it down changed everything. Robert Hargrove kept a ledger, not a spreadsheet, not a budgeting app, a physical, cloth-bound ledger book that he bought in Woolworths for 39 cents and used for 11 years before the pages ran out. Every Saturday morning, not Friday evening, not Sunday afternoon, always Saturday morning, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and updated that ledger in pencil. The pencil mattered. He wasn't committing, he was thinking. 3 columns only: money in, money out, what was left. That was it. No categories, no color codes, no percentage breakdowns. Just 3 columns, written in the careful hand of a man who took the act of recording seriously because he understood instinctively what researchers would later confirm: that the act of writing a number down makes you feel that number differently than simply watching it change on a screen. He wrote the numbers, he felt the numbers. And when the numbers in the 3rd column started to shrink, when what was left began drifting toward something uncomfortable, he didn't panic. He adjusted, quietly, deliberately, without drama. That's what the ledger gave him. Not a record of money, a conversation with money.
Miscellaneous was not allowed. Here's something that might surprise you. In 11 years of keeping that ledger, Robert Hargrove never once wrote the word miscellaneous. Not once. Every expense had a name. The name didn't have to be elaborate: church collection, haircut, buttonhole thread, fishing license. Every dollar that left the household got a name, because Robert believed, and this belief was as common in that era as lawnmowers and Sunday suppers, that money without a name was money already lost. This is a principle that modern financial research has actually validated, decades after the Hargroves were gone. Studies in behavioral economics have shown that untracked expenses, the ones we mentally file under miscellaneous or just don't categorize at all, are consistently the largest category of overspending in American households.
We don't overspend on rent. We don't overspend on car payments. We overspend in the unnamed spaces, the gaps between categories where money disappears without leaving a trace. Robert Hargrove had no gaps. Every dollar was accounted for, not because he was rigid, not because he was miserly, but because he respected money enough to give it a name. And things you name, you tend to take better care of.
There was one more element of the Hargrove financial system that set it apart from almost everything we use today. Robert called it the red line. He had drawn it, literally, in red pencil across the bottom of each month's ledger page, a fixed number, below which the "what was left" column was never, under any circumstances, allowed to fall. The red line was not zero. It was never zero. It sat at an amount equivalent to roughly 6 weeks of household expenses. That number was untouchable. It wasn't savings exactly. It wasn't an investment. It was a floor, a firewall, the financial equivalent of the space between you and the edge of a cliff. Margaret understood the red line the way she understood the property lines of their yard. You didn't cross it. You didn't borrow from it. You didn't tell yourself you'd replace it next month. In 16 years of marriage, they crossed the red line exactly once, when Robert had his appendix out in 1961 and missed 3 weeks of work. They rebuilt it within 4 months. And here is the thing about having a floor beneath you. You walk differently. You make decisions differently. You sleep differently. The red line wasn't just a number. It was peace of mind, drawn in pencil on a Saturday morning over black coffee, when a dollar held its shape. Let's sit with that inflation number for a moment. 1.3%. In 1964, prices rose by just 1.3% over the entire year. Now consider that in several recent years, American families have watched prices climb 5, 7, even 9% in a single 12-month period. Groceries, gasoline, rent, health care. The things that Robert and Margaret Hargrove could plan around, the things that stayed relatively stable from January to December, became moving targets for modern families before they could even adjust their footing. This matters enormously when we talk about savings habits, because the habits of the 1960s were built on the assumption that planning was possible, that if you set aside a certain amount this month, it would still mean roughly the same thing next month. Modern inflation has eroded something deeper than purchasing power. It has eroded the very confidence that planning is worth doing. Why set money aside if it will simply be worth less by the time you need it? The Hargroves never had to ask that question. And that question, corrosive, exhausting, quietly defeating, is one of the great unspoken financial wounds of modern American life. Opening the book they left behind. So here is where we find ourselves tonight. On one side of history, a couple in Columbus, Ohio, with 3 glass jars on a windowsill, a red line in a ledger, and a cookie tin full of grocery change, sleeping soundly in a paid-off house that cost them less anxiety than most Americans spend on a single month of subscription services. On the other side, us, armed with more financial tools than any generation in human history. More apps, more data, more access, more information, and yet, by nearly every measure, less financially secure, more in debt, more anxious, more one emergency away from the edge. The Hargroves didn't have superior intelligence. They didn't have a financial advisor, or a Roth IRA, or a robo-investor making micro-trades on their behalf at 2 in the morning. What they had was a set of habits, small, daily, deeply unsexy habits that compounded over time into something that looked, from the outside, like quiet prosperity. Tonight, we're going to open that playbook, habit by habit, story by story, because the most powerful financial tools in American history didn't require electricity. They required discipline. And discipline, unlike an app, never needs an update.
We've traveled a long way together tonight. We walked through Margaret Hargrove's kitchen. We counted coins in a shortbread tin. We watched Robert draw his red line in pencil on a Saturday morning over black coffee in a house that belonged to them, really belonged to them because they earned it the slow, unglamorous, deeply human way. And now we're here in 2026, where the average American household carries over $10,000 in credit card debt, where subscription charges slip out of bank accounts like quiet thieves in the night, where a generation raised on convenience has somehow become a generation that cannot remember the last time they felt financially safe. We didn't lose our money. We lost the habits that protected it. That's the thing nobody tells you. The problem was never income. The Hargroves proved that on $6,000 a year. The problem was never inflation, though Lord knows it hasn't helped. The problem, the quiet, creeping, decades-long problem, is that we traded friction for convenience. And friction, as uncomfortable as it sounds, was the very thing that kept spending honest. When you had to open a jar to get grocery money, you felt the groceries. When you had to write a number down in pencil to make it real, you felt the decision. When you slept on a purchase for 72 hours before spending cash you could see and touch, you felt the weight of the choice. Today, a single thumb tap removes all of that weight, all of that hesitation, all of that beautiful, protective friction, gone in a millisecond.